Today, I have an experienced crop tour scout who, in exchange for staying anonymous, is willing to peel back the curtain on the crop tour and share what he's seen. For our first question, why are you taking this opportunity to talk about crop tour?
Well, I'm not here to defend the crop tour, but I'm not here to knock it down either, though there are certainly some questionable practices that go on. I'm just going to tell you what I've seen over the years. I'll answer all your questions, as honestly as I can, and just going to share what my experience has opened my eyes to. I don't have any agenda I'm trying to push, but there are a lot of misconceptions among other farmers I talk to about what crop tour does and kind of what its methods are. So now, some of the negative parts you hear are true, and I'll talk about those too. And some are misunderstood too. So I want to share my experience, both the good and the questionable parts, because I don't think there's any other interviews like this, at least none that I've seen.
And about how many years have you been on crop tour?
Well, I've been on both the east and the west legs of crop tour over the years. I've done it almost 10 years total. Not all of them have been consecutive. I'd do a few years, and then if something came up, I'd take a year off, but about 10 years total. I want to be clear that I'm not on this year's crop tour.
With that much experience, I'm sure you've seen about everything. Why do you volunteer a week out of your life to go and scout fields for free for Pro Farmer, which I'll add for our viewers, is part of Farm Journal, so one of the larger ag media and data companies?
Well, for me, back when I first started, I thought it'd be interesting to see crops in areas, outside of my immediate backyard, and it was. But what turned out to be my favorite part was the networking opportunities with other farmers on tour, which that's something I hadn't originally thought of as being part of it. But I've met some really great people from all over the world, and I'm still in regular contact with some of them. And I've learned some new things to try just by talking with some really smart farmers who go on the tour. It's certainly not the most glamorous job in the world, but it's one of the better experiences as far as having helpful, meaningful conversations with some really smart people.
Trespassing is always a hot-button issue with crop tour. So first off, do crop tour scouts get permission to enter fields? And have you ever run into an angry farmer, and what was that like?
This is the thing that I really disagreed with. Eventually was one of the main reasons I stopped going on the crop tour. But no, nobody gets permission. So when people say crop tour is trespassing, they're right. Crop tour organizers fully know this, and they tell the scouts not to go in fields that are posted. But the fact remains that we don't have permission to enter any of the fields that are sampled. Now, I do understand it'd be nearly impossible to get that permission, as all the fields that scouts stop at are totally random. They're not pre-planned or anything, so tracking down landowners ahead of time would be a pretty hard thing to do. But this has really become a hot-button issue recently, and I'm surprised they haven't even tried to address it. They basically take the attitude that we've always done it this way, so we're not going to change now. And I've always wondered what their corporate attorneys have to say about it, but I don't think they're aware of it. And as far as running into a landowner who doesn't want us there, yes, over all my crop tours, hundreds of fields I've stopped at, there's been 4 times where I was told, to get off somebody's land, with one of those guys threatening to call the sheriff. Most farmers we ran into are just interested in talking. They want to see how their fields measured up, kind of what we've been seeing in the other areas. But, every field I stopped at, I was always, at least a little bit nervous, wondering if we'd have a confrontation with, an angry farmer or angry landowner. And one of the more surprising things about crop tour, and this came as a surprise to me. It probably comes a surprise to a lot of people out there, but the crop tour scouts hardly contain any staff from the corporate sponsors or anything, or employees. There's only about 1 or 2 paid staffers on each side of the crop tour. And, the rest of the scouts are farmer volunteers or ag media people. And the ag media people or the agribusiness, they have to pay to participate. The farmers can volunteer for free. So I guess the thing is, if you come across a crop tour trespassing on your field, don't get too mad at these farmer volunteers. I think the real complaints need to go to the corporations that put these on. Who you can contact there to voice your complaints, because the people you're talking to in your fields are not employees or staffers for the most part. They're volunteers. So I always wonder if enough individuals request their fields not be trespassed on, what happens to crop tour, because I think it could really be a big hurdle, for them to overcome if that ever becomes, a major concern where they have to actually act or respond to it.
Another annual question we see is if crop tour picks out the best or worst looking fields. In your nearly 10 years of experience, is there cherry picking of fields going on?
Now, like I mentioned earlier, there are not many pro farmer staff that are actually on crop tour, and not all of them are even out in the fields. So they're not overseeing every scout. So it's certainly possible there could be, rogue scouts that could go out there and only stop at certain fields. But I think with the amount of samples taken every year, those outliers probably wouldn't have a huge impact on the results when you average those out. So scouts do have a structure. I'm going to stop and how to sample a field, and they're assigned a general route to follow, but they have full autonomy along that route to stop, anywhere that they want. So, for example, on my route, our driver might say that we're going to turn left on the next gravel and pull into the first field entry we come to and sample that field. So it's totally random on how that works, and that kind of goes with the trespassing part, because you never know when or where you're going to stop. Sometimes those stops, I've seen them result in a hail-damaged field. I've measured fields that have been flooded out, and we couldn't even collect a sample, so we recorded a 0. And I've been in fields where we've had, 300 bushel of corn. But again, you're dependent on individual volunteers to follow this structure. So if a scout decides to bypass a certain field because it looks really good and they want a lower producing field, that could certainly happen. But really the only way for that to be found out is if one of the other scouts in the truck with him, report it. And I've never heard of anything like that happening. So I guess does it happen? Probably it does to some degree. But again, it's the decision of an individual scout that's kind of acting on his own. If they do that, I've never heard a pro farmer person give any type of direction as to what type of fields to look for.
A surprising comment you made was that there are very few paid staffers on crop tour. Do you know why that is?
Yeah, well, I don't know for sure, but I've spoken with pro farmer staffers, often in past years, and my general feeling is that there's just not a lot of employees there. I guess their entire business only has maybe 5 or 6 employees. I think that's why you see a lot of the Farm Journal people, like Michelle Time Morgan, pitching in, because the Pro Farmer is owned by Farm Journal, so I just don't think Pro Farmer is big enough to do it on their own. Here's a funny story about Farm Journal. So I met one of their VPs last year on crop tour. That was Chris something or other was his name, I think. That was the first time in his life he'd ever set foot in a soybean field. I couldn't believe it. Think about this: a vice president of an ag company who had never been in the field before, and he was actually telling people that. It's just something that I guess surprised me. I was thinking, if you're a vice president of an ag company, maybe you shouldn't be telling people you don't know much about agriculture. But true conversation I had last year that really stuck out to me.
We'll wrap things up for today. Thanks for being so open and honest about your crop tour experience. If our viewers have additional questions, can you come back and talk again?
I'd be glad to come back and answer any questions. Like I said, I'm not part of the companies that put on the crop tour. I can just share whatever I think and what I saw and share my experiences. If people have questions or are interested in hearing more, I'll gladly talk again sometime.